Hi and welcome back to this week's episode on Amplify. As mentioned in the previous episode, this is part 2 of our conversation Sustaining Self with Sana Powell, a licensed professional counselor, where we talk all about mental health care. If you haven't had the chance to yet, we'd recommend tuning into part 1 first. And if you've given that a listen, then welcome back. I feel like we have to talk about the effect that this current pandemic is having on our mental health. And there is this book that I have come across. It's called Together, The Healing Power of Human Connection. It's actually by a Dr. Vivek Murthy, who was formerly the US Surgeon General. And he did incredible research across the US. And he talks about a loneliness epidemic. And so he talks about what he refers to as a social recession and argues that loneliness needs to form part of our public health agenda. And I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about how loneliness can actually exacerbate issues like addiction or violence or polarization, which I think is a big one.
Yes. So we talked a little bit about isolation earlier and how it's a vicious cycle between experiencing difficult emotions, painful emotions, and then isolating yourself and feeling them even more. And I completely agree that having meaningful social interactions and meaningful relationships can on its own be so healing. And research has shown this. So we know this coming from a collective culture. We know the power. Sorry, I guess I'm speaking for you, but I think I can. We know that having your family and your tribe, your people can be so therapeutic. But one of my favorite research studies that was done that I use as an example with my clients a lot, actually, who struggle with addiction, is the rat park experiment. So this experiment took place in, I believe it was the 70s or 80s. And basically, there's 2 cages. One is called Rat Park, and it has lots of toys and colors and stimulation, and it has multiple rats, like a community of rats. And then the other cage is actually sort of like solitary confinement for a rat. I don't think there were any windows. There was just one rat alone. And in both settings, the rats had access to morphine and their food. And morphine is an opioid, highly addictive. So the rat brain is surprisingly really similar to the human brain, which is why they use rats. But what they saw was that even though both settings had equal access, unlimited access to the morphine and the food, those in Rat Park consumed significantly less than those who were socially isolated. And this just speaks so much to our condition as human beings. When we have social interactions, when we're stimulated, when we're active, when we're entertained, when we're happy, even if we have certain vices and unhealthy outlets available to us, they're just not as appealing because they don't outweigh the benefit of engaging in those social stimulating experiences around us. So this is something I bring up a lot with my clients who are suffering from addiction, and it resonates with so many people. So yeah, social connections are so important for healing.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking then, because obviously that Rat Park experiment talks to the power of community. But if somebody is addicted to a certain substance, or if somebody is, like polarized to the extent that they're spending all of their time on websites like 4chan, you find a community there as well. So then how do you figure out, or how do you sort of differentiate between a community that sort of helps you or sort of brings you back to them, as opposed to a community that you form which just encourages or makes you feel that, ratifies what you're doing, or ratifies or makes you feel that you're justified in certain behaviors that are not good for you or society?
Yeah, that's a great point. Healthy versus unhealthy
Yeah.
communities and that community influence. So, as you were talking, what came to mind for me was the power of diversity and diversity of thought within our communities. So, when we surround ourselves by people who are exactly like us, it can be pretty stunting. And while it may boost our egos by seeing ourselves in everyone around us and having all of our thoughts and our ideas and our emotions never challenged, never really pushed, just everything is validated all the time, it can be harmful because it doesn't allow us to gain a broader perspective. It doesn't allow us to grow, to reflect, to sharpen ourselves. And I think that's where brainwashing can come in, because if you are surrounded and indoctrinated by one message for your whole life, then you will become that message and you will believe that message. So I think there is so much power in people sharing their thoughts and opinions, because you might be the only one with that idea in the room. And until you say it, that is not in anyone's consciousness. So I think it is so incredibly important that we have a variety of friends, even friends we may not agree with all the time. That's fine. That's okay. Those
Mm.
conversations can be so fruitful and so beneficial.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's so important that you do sort of surround yourself with people who are very different to you. And at least, because I think sometimes people feel that, okay, I mean, I'm this person and I obviously can't be friends with a, quote unquote racist. And
Mm,
it's interesting to note that we sort of assume a lot of things about other people. And I'm not saying that, you should just go out and be friends with somebody who is blatantly racist, but I think there's definitely this thing that you should, if somebody is racist, obviously, like you can exclude them. There's always that opportunity to cut
right.
them out of your life, but that just assuming or just thinking that somebody, if they even differ ever so slightly from what your line of thought is, or what your line of experience is, and for that reason to not talk or to not engage with them, I think that is the danger that we face in today's day and age.
Yes, absolutely. And also, as you were talking, I was thinking about my identity as a Christian and how when I was younger, I thought that I shouldn't talk to people who are atheists because in some way it would deteriorate my beliefs as a
Mm,
Christian. But in reality, as Christians, we're encouraged to test our faith. And that applies to all beliefs that someone might hold, religious or non-religious. Because when you speak to someone who has such an opposite or contrasting perspective to yours, it can help you honestly reflect on why you believe what you do believe. And sometimes it can help you make adjustments to your beliefs that are more representative of who you are at that time in your life. So, yeah, I think that contrast that a differing perspective can provide can be really helpful. And with that, still setting those emotional boundaries to making sure that the person you're talking with and those conversations you're having are not harming you and are not hurting you, but they're growing you and they're expanding your perspective of the world.
mm, yeah. And while we're all under lockdown, one thing that's quite common now is that everybody's reaching out and staying connected via FaceTime and Zoom and what have you. And are these effective ways of connecting with people? How do we sort of connect with people and reach out to our loved ones during these very trying and difficult times?
Yeah, no, I think social media can be a huge gift for connecting with people that you really care about, whether they're your friends or your family members or members of a community that you miss and you want to connect with people you can talk to. And I think that social media used in that way can be so beneficial for the individual and the community. But more often than not, at least for me, I find myself mindlessly scrolling on my
Mm.
Instagram feed or my Facebook feed. And then at the end of the day, I feel so lonely and I realize I didn't really connect with anyone. So
Mm.
I think while social media can foster very authentic social bonds, it can also provide a false sense of connectedness. and you think, well, just because I received these likes on my picture, or I liked and commented on someone else's picture, we had a shared experience, but you really didn't. You didn't connect with them on a personal level at all. So I think being honest with ourselves about how we use social media is huge.
Yeah. And another thing that this crisis has sort of brought to light is, first of all, how inefficiently equipped our public healthcare systems and just generally healthcare systems in the world, across the world, are. But also then people who often are, frontline responders, whether they are in the healthcare industry working as nurses or doctors, or whether they are, for example, in the US working in the meatpacking industry, or they're in India working as delivery drivers, they're under unimaginable, undue amounts of stress at this moment. And they don't have access to the same resources. They don't even have access or the sort of luxury of just staying indoors, because the economy depends on them still. And I just wonder, how do we sort of address this balance when it comes to people who are working on the front lines, people who are from certain socioeconomic backgrounds, who don't have access to mental health care, who don't have access to any health care?
Yeah, it is really such a shameful disparity in our government and in our healthcare system. And I think the first step is just acknowledging this disparity. I know that when communities of color, specifically the Black and African American communities, were getting hit so hard with the COVID-19 cases, a lot of cynical people, typically they were white people, were saying, oh, well, that's because Black people don't practice the same level of hygiene as white people do. And that's why they're getting sick, because they don't wash their hands and they're not social distancing. No, in reality, the reason why communities of color are disproportionately affected by this pandemic is because of deeply embedded social inequities that have been in our society for hundreds of years. They've always been there. They're just highlighted in these times of crisis. So I think acknowledging those disparities is the first step. And I'm not an expert in policy, but things like prioritizing quality of care over quantity of care, I think could really help our healthcare system, so that, it's not so revenue focused in terms of the number of services provided, but really seeing outcomes, measurable outcomes, and then rewarding hospitals and healthcare centers for that, opposed to just merely administering a treatment. Making technology more incorporated into the way that we provide healthcare services. I think things like that can really help and bridge the gaps for these inequities. But until that time, I think they're just going to continue to resurface whenever we are hit with a crisis.
Yeah. And how do you envisage the pandemic will sort of reconfigure our society or the way that we live and work going forward, or post-pandemic even?
I think something I've been seeing through a lot of social media platforms is this idea of not taking things for granted. And as general of a statement that is, I have multiple friends whose weddings were canceled, living in Austin where there's so many, major music festivals that take place, seeing those get canceled and restaurants closing. I think people are going to hopefully just practice more gratitude and be more intentional with the way they spend their time, be more intentional with what they consume and what they're privileged with, I would hope. And also, just speaking of consumerism, being mindful of the things that we use every day. And at least for me, when there was a toilet paper shortage, I was like, oh no, I always took this for granted. I never thought I would not have enough toilet paper. So that, and also, on the other hand, thinking about what we don't want to return to. So there's all these norms that I'm excited to get back to, of being able to travel freely and see my friends and not have to limit myself when I buy certain things at the store. But there's also things that I realized that weren't great for me and that weren't really benefiting me moving me toward my goals. And I feel like this has been a really harsh reset button for a lot of people. And instead of being in a hurry to return to our norms, kind of re-envisioning what that new norm should look like.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely something that is a topic that comes up a lot in my other episodes as well, which is just how much, this pandemic in general has sort of like compelled people to consider the things that they can go without, and what specifically come up is because the people that I've spoken to thus far in the episodes for my podcast are people who work in sustainability, and they talk a lot about how just something as simple as slowing down, inculcating practices that help you slow down in your daily lives can actually make you so much more mindful, more intentional with what you do consume and then what you do not, because you're just not you're not on autopilot. You're more aware, you're sort of more present. And when you're more present as well, I think at least this holds true for me, you're kind of less anxious about what is going to happen in the future because you're just able to be present in the moment.
Yes. Yeah, I think being more present and mindful is so important. And also just thinking more about, in that same spirit of mindfulness, thinking about the messages we tell ourselves, because our self-talk really determines our life. So self-talk meaning just your everyday thoughts. What kind of things do you say to yourself? How do you feel about yourself? Are they harmful messages? Are they supportive and encouraging? And really just thinking about, do these messages help me or not? So that's been something that I have been thinking of in terms of sustainability and wanting to promote a more holistic sense of well-being by getting to the roots of how we talk to ourselves and what kind of language can we use with ourselves that can sustain us over time and not cause us to burn out.
Yeah. Do you think this then can also actually apply to the kind of narratives that people may find themselves in during this lockdown, where they're sort of questioning whether they're productive enough or whether they are working hard enough or whether they're just, doing enough number of things? Because suddenly during lockdown, I don't know about you, but there's also this increase in like people, making banana bread or making, like sourdough, and they're putting in all of this, and you're on the other hand, like, I mean, this is me, like, I'm just watching them do this, and I'm like, oh my God, why am I not regrowing plants or making bread or doing something very, cute and homely and domestic?
Right. No, I totally feel you on that. I watch those videos on YouTube too. On Instagram, I see those pictures and I love it, but I don't do it myself. And I'm like, well, why can't I do it?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think this value of being productive and continuing to produce and create over reflect and stay still, I think it's not sustainable because we all need to rest. And when we're under lockdown, we have nowhere to go. We don't really have that distinct separation between home and work anymore. It can be especially hard to make that dedicated time for rest and not let your stresses and your work and your obligations bleed into that very sacred time that we should all have just reserved for ourselves.
Yeah. And another thing that I sort of have struggled with during lockdown is sort of setting boundaries, because you're under lockdown wherever you are with whoever you are. And this is something I think I've particularly faced as a person. And I wonder if this is an experience that resonates with other Indian people as well. But boundary setting is something that I've always struggled with. I've always sort of felt guilty for either setting one down, for just spending some time by myself. Another sort of the other side of the coin of boundaries is enmeshment, where if somebody's having a bad day and you're having a neutral day or even a good day, you kind of then feel guilty or you feel bad for having a good day. And I mean, I know this sounds all very confusing, but then you sort of like absorb what the other person is going through, and then suddenly before you know it, your day has also gone down the drain. And I think that's particularly difficult to navigate when you're all, you have nowhere else to go. You can't just be like, I'm going to go for a walk and or meet some other people. I have to be here with these people. And how do we navigate that at home during this time?
Yeah, no, you bring up a great point of just being physically confined can really hinder our capacity to set emotional boundaries, which is funny to think about, but it's so true. So I think the first step is just acknowledging that you practicing self-care and you prioritizing your happiness it's selfish, but in a good way, because when you take care of yourself, it allows you to better care for others. And it also models healthy behavior for others. So instead of you taking on someone else's burdens and trying to fix things for them, or having the sense that if you feel their pain, they're going to feel better, instead of doing those things, but still showing compassion and still saying, I care about you, so I'm also going to care for myself. That's really healthy. So please don't feel guilty for it. That's something that I struggle with too. So it's something that I tell myself a lot. But if it is hard for you to take physical space, it may prompt you to have some conversations that it was easier to put off before because it was easier for you to just physically distance yourself. But now when we are confined with our family members or our partners, or maybe even our friends, setting aside time when you both are in a headspace to have a more emotional, perhaps difficult conversation, and making it about how you feel, not about what the other person is doing or not doing, but something I tell my clients is using I statements over you statements. So for example, I feel anxious when you emotionally dump your day on me after dinner, or, I feel sad when you don't really seem happy for me when something good happens in my life. So putting the focus on your emotions, I've found, is the most productive way to prevent conversations from getting adversarial and for the other person to go on the defensive. So you may be pushed to have some of these conversations sooner than you thought, but don't be scared, because oftentimes, you're going to have multiple conversations and you have to start somewhere.
Yeah. And speaking of starting somewhere, do you remember do you have any distinct memories of the time that you put forth and you set and enforced a boundary?
Yeah. So, to this day, setting boundaries, I'm not good at it. It's something that I really struggle with. And especially as a therapist, being someone whose job is to help other people feel better, it's so hard for me because my personality type, I want people to feel better. I want to help them. And having that emotional separation is something that I'm working on. But with my friends, I have a close group of friends, and I'm that friend who is good with whatever anyone else wants to do. Yeah. If we're going to go out to eat, as long as there's something vegan on the menu, it's fine, it's whatever. If you ask me my opinion, I'm probably going to turn it back on you and be happy to do what you want to do. But with my group of friends, it got to a point where I just had to put my foot down one day and I was really tentative about it, but I was like, hey, you guys, I actually don't want to go there because of this reason and that reason. And I felt so scared that I was going to hurt their feelings, that they weren't going to like me anymore, that they were going to think, I'm being unreasonable. All of this negative self-talk that I tell myself for feeling certain things, I realized I was projecting on them. And it was so healing for them to respond in such an accepting and loving way. They were like, Sana, we're just happy, thank you for telling us how you feel. We want to make sure that you're having fun too. And it's almost like I didn't believe it. I was like, oh, they're just saying that to make me feel better. But it showed me how powerful our negative self-talk can be, where even when we're faced with really loving and supportive messages from others, it can be hard to believe.
Yeah.
So that was one of my first experiences with setting boundaries. And my experiences these days don't look that different, honestly.
Yeah.
But, something I'm working on.
Yeah, no, that's definitely something that resonates with me because I always, like I said, I always struggle with setting boundaries, and it's so funny because it's something you would think it's something quite simple because it's reasonable, right? Okay, well, if there are two people and one of them definitely wants to go to like this wings joint, and then there's you who's
Yeah,
vegan and doesn't want to go there
right.
because there's only like
A salad. I was
salad.
like, I want
Yeah,
salad.
yeah, which let's
Yeah.
be honest, is not real food.
Right. It's not.
So
I don't like
yeah,
salad.
it's supplementary food. It's not like a main meal. But yeah,
Yes.
and I think, and if this one wing eating person is quite vehemently set on going to to this place, and it's just completely disregarding where you want to go, because this is exactly where you need boundaries, and probably where you need to reconsider your equation with this person, with this
Yeah.
wing eating maniac.
You bring up a great point. Yeah, when we try to set boundaries, the way people respond to that intention can be so telling. It can make things really clear for us in terms of who is supportive and who cares about our happiness and our well-being, and who just maybe wants us around because we make them feel good.
Yeah. And also, one thing that I've noticed with setting boundaries is I
Yeah.
remember that this one time, usually I'm also quite similar to you. I'm kind of okay with just going with the flow, is what I like to
Right.
call it.
Yeah.
And I remember once I was visiting one of my friends, and he needed to get some things from the grocery shop, and we were just walking around. And he was like, "Oh, do you want this or do you want that?" And like this and that was basically stuff that he wanted. And then I was like, "Oh, no, no, I don't want anything." And then he was like, "Okay, well then tell me what you want and I'll buy it for you, and we can go back and like have this
Yeah.
tea and this chocolate and all." And he's like, "Do you like this?" And he put in an effort to sort of like coax me to speak up about what I did actually want. And I
Yeah.
was just so touched by it. I mean, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm here in this grocery aisle just being like asked
Yeah.
about my chocolate options." And I think that's also, when you don't set any boundaries, you feel that you sort of convince yourself that people don't care about you, or people
Yeah.
aren't interested in what you want to do or what you think. And I think it's quite important that that gets challenged when you do set a boundary, and or when you just something as simple as just say no, because I said no to the first couple of options that he offered. So
Yeah. Yeah. It can help you reclaim who you are as a person outside of those maybe enmeshed relationships that you've grown so accustomed to.
yeah, absolutely. And there's also, I mean, this is something that, I don't know how many Bollywood movies that you watch,
A
but,
good amount.
this, yeah, there's this not having boundaries, or sort of this consistent violation of boundaries, or even just
Right.
testing, pushing somebody's boundaries is romanticized, specifically in romantic relationships, I think. But also it's sort of seen as like this real commitment to whether you are actually invested in this person enough to sort of influence them or get them to do it your way or whatever. It's sort of like seen as symbolic of passion or investment or whatever else. And I
Mm.
think I just wanted to ask you, about what you think about how boundaries are represented in media and sort of given a bad name.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think that the media does perpetuate the idea that setting up boundaries makes you a self centered, insensitive, cold person. And true love is one that is completely unmeshed. You are incomplete without your partner. You have to, breathe breathe together, and just this really unhealthy dependence. And as a therapist, I see this a lot in codependent relationships. So codependent relationships are ones that to an unhealthy level rely on their partners. So feeling like in order to regulate your mood if you become triggered or overactivated, or feeling like you're unable to really function with your daily tasks without having this person. And it's causing enough distress in your life that when they're not with you, you're maybe really insecure, you're very suspicious, you're jealous, you kind of you can't function. I think that is a big way that I see a lack of boundaries that can foster unhealthy relationship patterns and even mental illness. It can breed anxiety and depression and low self-esteem. And yeah, like you said, the media portrays true love as this roller coaster of emotions, the highs, the lows, the adrenaline rushes, the tears. And yeah, all relationships have those aspects to some extent, but I think that lasting relationships are steady, and in order to be sustainable, they have to have those emotional boundaries.
Yeah. And also, I mean, this is something that I'm not in a relationship now, but I do have friends who are in serious relationships, long-term relationships. And this is something that I've noticed, that we sort of tend to, perhaps because of this media representation, but I can't be sure, but we sort of tend to even seek out this roller coaster, this very fraught, high and low thing as a marker of like a successful relationship. Because oftentimes, once you're in a long-term relationship, perhaps you're married or something, it becomes quite like kind of having like a roommate, but not somebody who's passive necessarily, but just somebody when you get into a routine, you get into a zone where if suddenly tomorrow one of the people are just throwing a tantrum, it's absurd, because it's like, we're not in a movie, you don't have to do that, there's
Right.
It's weird, and its unpredictability is not welcome, and nor should it be. But because we sort of see that, we think that, oh my God, we've gotten into a rut, or we're in a pattern and we're not in love anymore. There's all of these different things that are at play.
Yeah, it may not be boring, it just may be sustainable.
Yeah, exactly. And it's, after a certain point, the thing is, you kind of just have to sit with your stillness, with the fact that there's not a lot necessarily going on, and that we are not actually in a movie or in a song or in a video game or whatever else. I think there's always a moment in everybody's life where you just sort of have to confront, in a good way, stillness and quietude.
Yes, absolutely. I agree.
And to that end, do you have any resources or tips that you recommend for beginning your journey into well-being and self-awareness, and any practical tips that you may have?
Yes, absolutely. So, going back to something we mentioned before, there's so many forms of therapeutic practices and there's so many forms of therapies.
Yeah.
So really finding what works for you and just what feels right for your soul. Don't judge yourself. If you find something that works and it's healthy, then go for it.
Yeah.
So just starting with the things that I found helpful, and Sanchi, I know you empathized with meditation. So we talked a little bit about the Headspace app. They offer a set of meditations that are free and can be great to just help you get started. So you don't have to pay for anything if you don't want to. I'm not super familiar with the Calm app, but I know that it's a comparable app that has guided meditations. I've done it a few times and they have really calming nature sounds. So sometimes you just need some white noise to just help your mind escape, especially during lockdown conditions, just sort of letting your mind wander and letting it enter that rainforest that you're listening to on your phone.
Yeah.
And YouTube has some great videos, especially for deep breathing exercises. So even if you want to take a quick break while you're working, just for 30 seconds even, or just a minute, and just following this expanding bubble as you breathe out and as you breathe in, and just sort of losing yourself in that visual for a minute can be really helpful in re-energizing you and recentering you for the rest of the day, and can help prevent things like burnout. Aside from meditation and deep breathing exercises, if you feel like you're at a place where you want to try therapy and you would like to give it a shot, so Sanchi, maybe you can follow up with this, or maybe you have some resources now, because I'm not familiar about in India, but if you are listening and you're in the States, Psychology Today is a great website to start off at if you'd like to find a therapist in private practice, there's a lot of bios that outline what the therapists specialize in and some of their experience. And this applies to wherever you are in the world. Looking into community health centers, I think oftentimes they're not given as much credit as they deserve, but they can be very affordable, and you can find great therapists who are right in your community. You don't have to go to a fancy private practice therapist.
Yeah.
So those are some resources, and I would just suggest finding some kind of physical exercise that you enjoy, whether even if it's just stretching or going for a walk in nature. For me, having that physical release for my emotions is really helpful. So I would encourage you guys to find what works for you.
Yeah. I mean, I can't think of any relevant resources similar to the ones that you've talked about off the top of my head at this moment, but I will do some research and I'll make sure that for our listeners, they will have the resources that you mentioned and that I do and come up with on the Spotify blurb, like the episodic blurb that you have to fill out so that people can navigate to that and have access to whatever, all the discussions that we're having. And I think my final question to you then is, do you think that during your time as a practicing therapist, do you think there's been an increase in people's openness to talk about mental health issues in the recent years?
Yes, I definitely think there has been an increase in people's openness. And I don't know if you've seen Never Have I Ever on Netflix. Oh my gosh, it's my favorite show. I mean, I knew it was going to be my favorite show before I even watched it. Yeah. But basically, for those who have not watched Never Have I Ever, it is an amazing teenage coming-of-age comedy show about this first-generation Indian American girl, Devi, and just her experience and the world through her lens as she deals with grief and trauma and just being a teenager and straddling both sides of her culture. But I say all that because I think it was a beautiful representation of how the next generation is becoming even more open to embracing their emotions and talking about their experiences and sort of finding themselves and figuring out what kind of culture they want to embody. And that makes me really happy. So I'm also a positive person. So sometimes I see positivity when it's not there. But I really do think that there has been an increase in talking about our emotions. And that makes me really happy.
Yeah. And I said that this was going to be my last question, but I think this is my last question. And this is perhaps the most important question of all. Devi with Ben or Devi with Paxton?
Oh my goodness. Oh, this is the question that has kept me up at night.
Yeah.
I think Devi with Ben. Even though, is that what you think too?
Yes. Oh my God, yeah. I feel so happy right now. Like, we should surround ourselves with like alternative opinions, but right now I am over the moon with joy.
Oh yeah, no. If you're Team Paxton, you can just leave. No, I'm kidding.
Yeah, exactly. We don't want you listening on this.
And I mean, bringing it full circle, Ben is the sustainable option. Paxton is not sustainable.
Yeah, Paxton kind of like yo-yos around, doesn't he? And I find that he's like, like if every time he has to sort of step up, it has to be his sister telling him to step up, then I think that's automatically like Devi may as well be in a relationship with his sister then and not him, because I find him like he's either his character needs to develop significantly for season 2, but currently at his current stage of development, I just find him obnoxious.
Yes, in my clinical opinion, I concur.
Well, thank you so much, Sana. I was actually, can you believe I was going to call you Devi for a second?
That's a huge compliment.
Thank you so much, Devi. I'm like, what the hell am I saying? No, sorry. Thank you so much, Sana, for being on this episode. I know that it's quite late on your end, and thank you for staying awake, and thank you for this excellent conversation. I had such a fun time speaking with you.
No, the feeling is mutual. This was so fun. I feel like we could just talk for hours, and I think that is a testament to how great of a host you are. So, this was a lot of fun, and maybe we can do more in the future.
Yes, absolutely. This brings us to the end of season 1. Thank you so much for all the enormous support, your feedback, your engagement, encouragement with what I've been trying to do here with Amplify. It's been an incredible journey. I've had some of the best conversations, met some brilliant people, and grown so much in my outlook. It should come as no surprise then that I do have a season 2 in works. I wouldn't want to keep you in suspense about that, and that it will be out very, very soon. And I promise Amplify is about to get a lot bigger, so that is definitely something to be celebrated. I have an exciting lineup of topics and guests for you for the next season. And if you have any recommendations for guests, burning questions on any of the topics that we've covered thus far, or any other feedback at all for our show, please do get in touch with us via Instagram at Amplify Podcast. That's all one word. There you will find all the relevant information about me, the next season, its release date, and a wealth of resources to keep you inspired and engaged about how to be your greenest self. Things won't be quieting down on there anytime soon anyway. Stay safe, stay well, please keep listening. Sending you all so much love, and thank you so much. See you soon.